Hello, and welcome to this analysis of the chart of Amy Lee of Evanescence. I will be taking what is hopefully an in-depth look at this chart and doing my best to give my interpretation of it. Today is Amy Lee's birthday, as you all will see, and so I thought it's also Friday the 13th, interesting enough, so I thought what better day to analyze her chart than on her birthday. Okay, the audio is good. As usual, I need just a minute or so to get everything set up. Okay, I'm going to share this to Twitter. Let's see. I am currently doing a live analysis of the birth chart of Amy Lee of Evanescence. Of course, freaking autocorrect has to change Amy to any, but we fix that. Currently doing a live analysis of the birth chart of Amy Lee of Evanescence. Okay, tweet that. All right, I'm just going to make sure that tweet looks good, and then we can get right into it. Okay, the tweet looks good. So I wasn't sure, let me explain this first, if I should, like last time, have included a copy of the birth chart via Twitter, like through the chat, like upload it to Twitter in a tweet and then put a link to it in the chat. I wasn't sure if people actually find that very useful, but I don't know, maybe at some point in the stream we will. Like if anyone actually does find that useful, let me know either in this stream or at some point in the future, and I can be sure to do that. Or maybe I'll just throw it in there later, just in case anyway. I don't know, but instead, what we're going to do, since I don't have the proper technology to share my screen, is I'm going to show the chart of Amy Lee on my tablet here, as I did in my previous birth chart analysis. So, full disclaimer, I've been studying astrology for 3.5 years now, and while I feel like I know a pretty good amount of it, have become fairly competent at it and can interpret birth charts pretty easily. At the same time, you're not going to get what you would get from someone who's been doing this for decades. So just a little disclaimer there, but I do have a lot to say about this chart. For those of you who don't know, Amy Lee, of course, is the vocalist of Evanescence. They became really big back in 2003 when I was just a young teenager, and I've been a fan of them for years. I'd say still to this day, they're one of my favorite bands, some of the best music I've ever heard in my life. And it is my great honor and privilege to analyze the birth chart of Amy Lee, their lead vocalist, Evanescence's lead vocalist. So without further ado, let us begin. So actually, I'm going to pull up the chart on my computer as well, so I can refer to that at times just for myself. It'll make it easier as I'm doing this. Sorry, guys, I should have done this before I went live, but doing these kinds of streams is something I'm fairly new to, and so still not quite used to how I want to set everything up. But anyway, so you can see her chart right here on my tablet. It's an overview of it. And as you can see also here, the corner, she was born December 13th, 1981. If this will show up. Well, she was born December 13th, 1981 in Riverside, California at 6:50 p.m. Pacific time. And as you can see, we are also using whole sign houses because at this point in my astrological development, I find them to most of the time be the most effective, especially for some of the sort of techniques or whatever interpretive techniques that I'll be using in this stream. So let's see here. Hang on a second. Okay. So I'm going to start with the basics, most fundamental things, and then we're going to steadily progress into more and more advanced and like detailed analysis of her chart. So it is now my great honor and privilege to analyze the birth chart of Amy Lee. We'll start with her sun, rising, and moon. Her sun is at 22 degrees of Sagittarius, and I will show these things on my tablet from time to time, but I'm just going to give a little overview first. Her sun is at 22 degrees of Sagittarius, giving her sense of self, her inner self, what she identifies with, being the energy of Sagittarius, which is very idealistic, very hopeful, very aspirational, highly creative, interested in knowledge. It's a very optimistic kind of energy. But then we have, let me contrast that real quick with her ascendant in Cancer. You see, I should have said this right off the bat. You see, this is a very complicated chart. I mean, I guess a lot of charts are, but in my opinion, to really properly explain the energy dynamic of this chart may not be entirely easy because there's a lot of stuff going on, and I guess you could say that about any chart, but there's a lot of nuances you have to understand, because it's like there's a lot of like, while she is on the one hand this, she's on the other hand that. And so I'm going to, of course, again, do my best to explain that. So I mentioned her sun in Sagittarius. That is indeed then contrasted by her Cancer ascendant at 21 degrees of Cancer, giving her outer self, her self-expression, much more reserved and like deeply emotional vibe, a very nurturing kind of energy. Hello there, Ryan. Welcome to the stream, mister. Good to see you here. Hope you're doing well. So Cancer giving her that emotional, nurturing energy. You know, Cancer is like the sign of the mother that protects something so that it can grow. And so on the one hand, Amy Lee has this very almost bombastic energy of the sun in Sagittarius. We're going to get into that more here in a bit. But on the other hand, she has this very like cautious, reserved Cancerian energy And yet that's more of her outer self, but like on the inside, she's extremely passionate and full of inspiration and things of this nature. Now, going right along with that, of course, is her moon at the very, very beginning of Leo, at 0 degrees, 25 minutes of Leo. So the moon, of course, talks about our subconscious, our hidden drives and stuff like that. And so where a lot of that comes from for Amy Lee is this energy of Leo, which is all about being very bold and in the spotlight. And it's another fire sign like Sagittarius, what her sun is in. So it's very spontaneous and willing to take action, willing to act. And it's an extremely loyal energy, an energy that has a deep love and a deep care, I would say, about things. But interestingly enough, so is Cancer when it comes to the idea of really caring about something, but that's in a much more nurturing sense, whereas a Leo is much more showy and that sort of thing. So what else was I going to say about that? So basically, we have her sun and her moon both in fire signs, like intense, inspirational, creative fire signs. But her ascendant is in a water sign, all emotional and much more flowing and that sort of thing. So there's an interesting contrast there. Still feel like there was something else I was going to say about her moon, though. What was it? I don't know, but maybe it'll come to me. Let me read the chat in the meantime. Can't lie to you, Mr. Poetic. I'm in a pretty tough spot at the moment. Hopefully it's going to get better. I'll just have to wait and see. Oh, no. I'm sorry to hear that, Ryan, but I appreciate your honesty. It's a very important thing to be honest about how we feel. I hope things get better for you also. If it's any consolation, my life is a bit rough also at the moment. But yeah, I hope things get better and maybe we can talk more about that later. Let's see. All right, so those are the basics. Amy Lee is a sun in Sagittarius, a moon in Leo, and a Cancer rising. So looking further at her Mercury, well, she also has Mercury in Sagittarius at 23 of Sagittarius. And so this essentially is saying that she thinks like a Sagittarius. Her thought processes are very idealistic, very creative, very inspirational, very enthusiastic, this sort of thing. But you see, this is where we're going to have to get into more details, I think, and jump around a bit because what we really have here is a Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction in Sagittarius in Amy Lee's 6th house. And I will show that here on the screen or through my tablet, I guess. A Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction in her 6th house and in Sagittarius. And so what does this mean? Well, first of all, her sense of self, the sun, is going to be associated with Mercury and Neptune things. Okay, well, what's Mercury and Neptune? Mercury is our mind and communication, but it's also our voice. Mercury is where our words and communication come from. And so we have this idea of singing, being the vocalist of Evanescence. That would be my interpretation of that anyway. So her sense of self, her self-identity is very much connected to Mercury things, singing, being a singer, a vocalist. Now, I mentioned we also, of course, have Neptune there. What is Neptune? Neptune is the planet of spirituality and the mysterious realms and the planet of mist and smoke, and you can never grab hold of it. It's the planet that expands and disperses until it fills the entire universe. It rules all things mysterious, all things otherworldly. It's great for creativity and intuition and stuff like that, but it can also make one prone to like delusions and confusion and things of that nature. I've talked about this before, of course, on other streams. But basically, Neptune, similar to Jupiter, is very often you will find going to amplify what it touches. And so this Sun-Mercury-Neptune conjunction that Amy Lee has in Sagittarius, I would say, is also just amplifying her sense of self as a singer, as a vocalist. However, it goes a step further. So I think it's very interesting that Amy Lee became well known for being the lead vocalist of a band called Evanescence. Here's the thing. We're gonna do this live. What is the definition of the word evanescence? Just wait. What is the definition of evanescence?
According to vocabulary.com, evanescence comes from the Latin evanescere, meaning disappear, vanish. Something that possesses qualities of evanescence has a quality of disappearing or vanishing.
Disappearing or vanishing, like smoke or mist or something mysterious. So isn't it freaking interesting that she has this Sun-Mercury-Neptune conjunction in Sagittarius, itself ruled by Jupiter, by the way, and that she ends up being the lead vocalist of a band known as Evanescence, called Evanescence, which literally is a Neptunian name. So I find very interesting indeed. Let's see. I'm going to briefly read the chat at times, unless you guys think that's distracting. Just tell me. See, it's very interesting. So far, everything sounds spot on. Thank you, Liz. Two things that aren't really my fault or anything I did per se. I'm more so collateral damage. I hate situations like that. She's such a mystical powerhouse. She is. Amy Lee is such a treasure. You also don't hear any bad drama or any slander like that around her in the public eye. That's very true. I've heard very little issues with her over the years. So let's expand on this Mercury-Neptune, or this Sun-Mercury-Neptune conjunction a bit, though, that Amy Lee has. So as I mentioned, it's in Sagittarius itself, ruled by the planet Jupiter. Jupiter is also about this idea of expansion and is associated with spirituality, but I would say in a more philosophical sense. So we have her sun in Sagittarius being ruled by a planet that is so much about philosophy and to an extent spirituality and all of that. And then Neptune is also present along with Mercury. So you guys get the idea. She's very much wrapped up in this idea of being connected to those spiritual philosophical realms. By the way, I'm going to ask you guys right now, since you're here, if you could let me know in the chat, do you want me to post a link to her chart through my Twitter so you can look at it while we're talking, or do you just want me to talk about her chart? Because I can do that while I'm live real quick if you want to see it, but I only want to do that if people are actually going to, want to look at her chart as I'm talking about it. Otherwise, I'll just continue to show it on my tablet. Well, I'll show it on my tablet regardless. Anyway, so moving forward here, another very interesting thing, you see, I've been doing some additional studying on the nodes of the moon recently, and I'm including both the north and the south node in this chart. Well, if you look at her north node in Cancer, how the hell am I going to do this? You can see it right there. It is basically conjunct her ascendant as well in Cancer. That tells me, according to some of the reading I was doing recently, that it is very likely that Amy Lee in this life is living out a life that she is destined to live. In other words, that kind of conjunction is said to indicate a life that is highly fated. In other words, what she has become, or like became over the years, getting very well known for being the lead vocalist of Evanescence and everything else she's done since then, she was probably pretty much destined to become. Now, I personally believe there's still an element of choice and free will even under those conditions, but I think it's very interesting that there's astrologically what appears to be a high probability that her life is a very fated one. It's one that is ruled very much by destiny, that she was destined to become this very well-known singer. All right, so let me take a sip of water here. Fine with you talking about it, though you could future-proof the video by leaving a link to it in the description. Okay, yeah, that's an idea. Or I could just, I don't know, should I tweet it real quick? Then people can go look at it if they want. I don't know, whatever. You guys tell me what to do. Let's see. Anyway, moving on. So that's her north node and her ascendant. And of course, well, let's expand on that a little bit. So her north node in Cancer, and that is opposed to her south node in Capricorn. So according to the additional research that, wait, let me read this. Not really pitting them against each other, but just comparing their lives would be neat. Wait, comparing whose lives? I'm confused. So according to the research I did recently, the south node is very often, if not perhaps even always, indicative of what we do automatically and what we've sort of perhaps mastered in past lives. But other astrologers will say it's kind of our karma from past lives, like what we habituated in past lives or something we struggled with in past lives. So if we first of all interpret this, her south node in Capricorn being that in past lives she became very, very, very good at Capricorn things, basically. Maybe she became highly industrious or very successful in a very public sense, hardworking sense, that sort of thing. The contrast is that the north node is supposed to be this idea of what we have to put forth effort to do and become in this life. And I've been saying for a long time that the north node, at least in the way that I've seen it and interpreted it over my 3.5 years of studying astrology, seems to be one's life purpose, more or less. So here's where this gets very interesting. So Amy Lee has her north node in Cancer, as if to say that her life purpose, or maybe even like a life lesson, if you will, in this life, something that she has to work hard to achieve, is becoming much more familiar and in touch with the more like emotional, intimate, domestic, perhaps even nurturing or family-oriented side of life, as opposed to like in past lives or whatever, being much more about her public life, her career success, her, maybe she had like an industrious way of being and was very successful at it in past lives. And so in this life, and well, actually, it could have even been that she did that in past lives at the expense of family life and becoming familiar with emotional realities and that sort of thing. And so that's why in this life, she chose, I guess, upon incarnating, to make that emotional stuff a big part of her life, like a big aspect of what she was going to have to work to become familiar with in this life. And I mean, obviously, I don't know her personal life, but if we look at her as an artist and we look at her music or listen to her music, it seems like she has fulfilled that purpose quite well and continues to do so. It's very passionate, emotional music. But see, the thing is, it's not like cancer is just emotional. Cancer is so many things. Every sign is so many things, but it's also very much about this idea of like nurturing and nurturing something so it can grow, and family life and that sort of thing, as I mentioned earlier. And so we're not necessarily going to know that because we aren't going to be privy to her personal life, nor should we be, unless she wants to share some aspect of it. But I would say that that's probably a very big factor for her in this life with her North Node in Cancer. Wait, between Amy Lee and Gwen Stefani, spelling No Doubt singer. Oh, comparing their lives. Yeah, maybe we could do that sometime, or maybe we could even do that at the more towards the end of this stream after we're sort of through with Amy Lee's chart. Yeah, I'd be happy to take a look at that, as long as we don't run out of time. Damn, it's already 8:57, but oh well. I'll just I'll go over my allotted time if necessary. Okay, so that is her North Node, South Node delineation. I think there was something else I was going to say about that, though. What was it? Let's see, the South Node. Oh, yeah, just the idea that, as I alluded to earlier, the South Node can also indicate, according to some astrologers out there, like Stephen Forrest, for example, this idea of what we struggled with in a past life, kind of like bad karma or like trauma from past lives or that sort of thing. And so if that theory is correct, then her having her South Node in Capricorn would suggest that she also had a lot of trauma or just bad things happening when it comes to Capricorn's things. So when it comes to hard work, when it comes to career, when it comes to great success or trying to achieve great success, when it comes to facing reality, of course, Capricorn being a very reality-oriented sign of thing. So it's interesting that may be something she's carrying into this life for whatever reason. All right, so where shall we go next? Let me see here. She also has that North Node in her first house, suggesting that the area in which this development or fulfillment of becoming very familiar with the emotional realities of life is going to take place, all this like personal, private stuff is going to take place, is actually with her personally, her first house, like her as an individual. So it's likely something that is deeply personal to her. But anyway, let's move on to another part of the chart. Let us see. So we already talked about her Mercury. Let's move on to her Venus. Venus is what we love, what we enjoy. It's how we form relationships. It also refers to money and socialization in general. Well, she, like me, by the way, has Venus in Aquarius, but unlike me, she has Venus in her 8th house. So Venus in Aquarius essentially is the idea of expressing affection in a very unique way. And I would say liking things that are very unique, enjoying things that are very different, perhaps forming relationships in ways that are very unique and different. And also, I would say an element of emotional detachment from relationships and love life and stuff like that. Still very much, still very much feeling of it, especially with her ascendant and north node in Cancer, emotional Cancer, but almost tempered by her Venus in Aquarius, which could give her a bit of an emotional detachment from it, with Aquarius being this emotionally detached sign, essentially a very intellectual sign, the most intellectual sign of the zodiac. So, and then of course that is in her 8th house, the 8th house of business and other people's money, of sex, death, and taxes, of secrets, of your partner's values, your partner's money. Venus in the 8th house, well, this would be my interpretation, at least at this time. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I have very often heard the 8th house associated with a lot of dark things, essentially. What was I going to say about that? Well, with it also being like the house of secrets, the house of death, the house of, I've heard it referred to the unconscious. And so Venus in the 8th house, I would tend to think of, a love Venus of dark things, 8th house. And I think it's fair to say that Amy Lee over the years certainly has appeared to have quite the love of dark things. It's part of what makes her the legend that she is, essentially. So let's see. After the stream, I'm probably going to just dive into her artist history. I simply just don't know much about her as an artist or really band. Wouldn't call them a one-hit wonder, more like a skimming. I see. The Radar Group, popular enough to be known, yet not so huge that everyone is always hooked on every possible thing they do, like Ozzy or AC/DC have still. What are you referring to, Amy Lee and Evanescence, or another group? Sorry, I'm so confused sometimes when I read the chat. All right, let's see. There is so much in this chart. I'm really hoping we can get through everything I want to talk about, because there is so much. Let's talk briefly about her Mars, also very significant. She has it at 29 of Virgo and in her 3rd house. So Mars in Virgo, very simply put, is being very aggressive and motivated about precision and practicality, that Virgo energy of laser focus, of being down to earth and practical, of figuring things out. And so I think there's astrologically speaking, there should be a part of Amy Lee's personality, or predisposition, if you like, that really prioritizes figuring things out, actually analyzing things and figuring things out. And it's in her 3rd house. And so there's this idea again with the 3rd house of like communication, mental activity, short distance travel. But, the planet that's right at home in the 3rd house is Mercury, which again, I'm saying refers to singing as well. Mercury, words, communication, one's voice. So that's kind of interesting. But what we see here, if we can just jump around a bit, is her midheaven is at 8 degrees of Aries. So let me show that for you guys real quick. Her midheaven, right up here, is at 8 degrees of Aries. And since it's in Aries, that means it is in fact ruled by that 3rd house, Virgo Mars. So there it is again. 3rd house, Virgo Mars. Sorry, I know it won't focus, but it's all right, because let me get to the point I'm coming to. So midheaven in Aries. Interesting placement for Amy Lee, and I think it does make sense, and here's why. So the midheaven is like our ideal career or calling in life, our main focus. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, ruled by aggressive, assertive, go-getter Mars. And so it's like saying that her career or calling in life is a very trailblazing one that is sort of breaking into new territory, and one that she's very much willing to take action regarding. And like, I don't know, maybe some people will disagree with me, and I'm certainly not an expert on music, but I don't know. I love music. I've listened to it all the time for nearly all my life, virtually all my life. I would say that before Evanescence came along, there wasn't really any other band like them that was as mainstream as them, that was as well known as them, that was able to break into the mainstream as much as they did. So I think that could be quite possibly what we're seeing here. Her midheaven is in trailblazing Aries. She's taking something new. She's pushing Mars, asserting something new into the sort of mainstream music consciousness or musical awareness. So on that note, we can then look back at her Venus, and we can note that Venus also rules art and music. And again, she has it in Aquarius, the unique, different, unexpected, like futuristic sign. And so it's as if to say that her art, her music is very unique, different, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it's in the 8th house, as if to say, oh, it's dark, the 8th house of death and secrets and the unconscious. Sound a little like Evanescence's music? I think so. I mean, they have other songs that are like kind of exceptions to that, but you know, they talk a lot about dark things in their music. I mean, I don't even have to say that. Now, listen to this next point that I'm about to make. Venus and Mars, we just talked about. Well, her Venus, in fact, trine, or I literally fucked up saying that. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her Venus, in fact, trines her Mars. That's what I meant to say. With Mars, again, being the ruler of her midheaven. So we have this Mars-Venus trine. Let me just show it on screen again here. A trine is a harmonious aspect that is like very flowing, like it's smooth, it's easy energy. And so think about this, people. Think about this. Remember, we have her midheaven in Aries. Midheaven is career or main calling in life. That midheaven in Aries is ruled by her Mars, which is also in a trine with her Venus. And Venus is art and music. It rules art and music. And so we have this idea of Mars ruling her midheaven, making her very much willing to like push forward and take action and prioritize what Mars is in a powerful trine to, which is Venus, art and music in the 8th house of a dark, sort of deathly nature. So there you have it. When I think of her music, I think of very powerful, intense, yet beautiful art. Same here. And I think that is also a big reason why it is so passionate, is because it's literally being fueled by that passionate Mars. Now, let's look into this a bit further here, because we can focus in even more on the music. So her Venus, being in Aquarius, is ruled by her Saturn in Libra and in her 4th house. Now, what's interesting about this, actually, how do I want to go there yet, or do I want to? Okay, yeah, let me explain one thing at a time. So her Venus in Aquarius is ruled by her Saturn in Libra in her 4th house. Let me just show that there. Like, I'll point to it in case we have new students to astrology here, or those who are just curious about Amy Lee and, want to point it out. Saturn, co-present with Pluto in Libra and in her 4th house. So the fact that Saturn, the ruler of her Venus, which is music and art, is co-present with Pluto means that Pluto is also going to influence her music and art, Venus, through the auspices of Saturn. At least that would be my theoretical interpretation. That's, some others out there perhaps maybe might disagree. I don't know. But so what is Pluto? Pluto is death and transformation. It is cleansing, purification, detoxification. It's the unconscious. It's the hell realms. It's all the things that are deep and dark and intense about life. It is co-present with her Saturn, which rules her Venus, which is representative of her art and music. And so again, we have this Pluto element of deep, dark, and intense to her music. Now, what is ruling over her Saturn and Pluto in Libra and in her 4th house? Well, Libra is ruled by Venus. So it is Venus. They are there's a term for this and it's escaping me right now, but they're like mutually ruled by one another. So what this all boils down to is her Venus is very much influenced by her Saturn and Pluto. Saturn is, of course, also a very like rough planet that is in its own way associated with death and with mutation, and with like dark realities. And then, of course, Pluto, as I've already went over. So her Venus, meaning her art and music, are associated with those things, and then those things, Saturn and Pluto, are also associated with her Venus. So I think I explained that pretty clearly. So yeah, powerful and intense, yet beautiful music indeed. Let us see what else we can talk about with her chart now. Where shall we go next? Let us just see. We covered pretty much everything with the nodes. I was just thinking if there's anything else I wanted to say there, but I don't think so. Let's move on sort of in the order of the planets to her Jupiter, which she has in Scorpio and in her 5th house. So Jupiter indicates the area of life in which we grow and have our expansion. Jupiter, of course, magnifies whatever it touches. Scorpio is a sign that is very deep and dark and intense itself. Scorpio is all or nothing. Scorpio cares about the bare bones reality. Scorpio cares about what really matters. Scorpio is very emotional, very passionate, very dark. And someone who has Jupiter in Scorpio is going to be very much predisposed to wanting to really explore those deep, dark, intense, passionate realms. I'll give you an example, and this is definitely not the same thing, but it's something I discovered recently that will kind of give you even more of an idea of this Jupiter and Scorpio energy. I actually looked up the chart of Chris Hansen recently. If you don't know, he is the one who is very well known for his show To Catch a Predator, and he's done a lot of work. Geez, I hope this stream doesn't get demonetized now, but oh, well, whatever. Fuck it. He's done a lot of work over the years, both in that show and out of that show, dealing with crime and trying to get like inside the mind of criminals and, people who engage in really awful behavior. And he has Jupiter in Scorpio. So there's that Jupiter, that area of growth and expansion, and let's sort of focus on this. And there's Scorpio, that deep, dark, investigative energy as well. And so you have someone who, is really focused on the dark areas of life. Well, Amy Lee also has that Jupiter in Scorpio, but it is of course manifesting in another way for her. It's manifesting in the exploration of dark music and art, overall. Again, I would say there's a significant amount of the music of Evanescence, and I feel like I always got the feeling that Amy Lee did this on purpose, that explored other areas that were not so dark. And so I'm not saying like, oh, all their music is dark and that's all that Evanescence will ever be. No, absolutely not. Obviously, a large portion of it, probably the majority of it, is fairly dark and intense and passionate, just like the energy of Scorpio. And so you have her Jupiter in Scorpio. By the way, in case anyone is wondering, once we get through this main analysis of her birth chart, like later on, I'm going to also use some predictive astrology to basically give a prediction of what is likely to happen in her life this year, like in the next year or so, since I think that's very interesting as well. So we'll get to understand her personality and life better through what we're doing now. And then I'm going to use some predictive astrology to maybe understand or sort of forecast what's coming next for her. That'll be very exciting. Let's see. Why don't you take a seat right there? Exactly. Criminal. No, I'm good. I'm just going to leave the house. Chris. No, how about you have a seat just right there? That's yeah, have a seat with Chris Hansen. Oh boy, that gets into a whole nother area of activity that's been going on recently that I would have much to say about, but that we will have to save that for maybe another stream if that ever happens. But yeah. So now where shall we go next? I feel like there was something else I was just about to say, perhaps. Drink some water while the gears of my mind turn some more. Oh yes, I remembered what it was. So I have talked a lot recently about the dreaded, the ominous, the terrifying, the intense, the feared Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January of 2020 that we are now less than a month away from. Oh my God. And it's happening in my sign of Capricorn over my Mercury. I hope I don't lose my mind. But if you haven't noticed already, and I basically already pointed this out, Amy Lee herself has a natal Saturn-Pluto conjunction. It was, as we were just talking about, her Saturn and Pluto in Libra in her 4th house. So now, yes, they are 6 degrees apart, so it's not like it's an exact Saturn-Pluto conjunction. It was, I guess, I have to look this up technically to be sure, but I think based on my knowledge of the patterns of the planets, it would virtually have to be this, virtually guaranteed. Saturn was on its way to a conjunction with Pluto at that time. Let me see here. It wasn't in some weird retrograde, was it? No. Actually, I can just hang on. I'm going to find out live. If you guys don't mind, I can do that easily by animating the chart. Let's go back a year. Okay, let's go forward a year. Okay, yes, I'm correct. But now, how do I go back to a regular chart? Hang on one moment. Yes, a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, not exact, but still close enough to have a profound, powerful effect. And so, in case you haven't heard me talk about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's happening already, I'll briefly sum it up. This is an aspect that only happens every 30 some years. It's not exactly common. And it's Saturn the Grim Reaper, the planet of death, reality, and limitation, meeting up with Pluto, the Lord of the Underworld, the Hell realms, the deep, dark unconscious. And both planets basically talk about death in their own way. It's like, yeah, nice. I know, right? Well, a big thing we see with a Saturn-Pluto conjunction when it happens by transit, so not when it's in the natal chart, but when it's by transit, like it will be next month, is like the breaking down of old structures that are not working so that new ones can take their place, but through a process of upheaval that is extremely difficult in many cases. Not saying it'll be like that for every single human on Earth, when we have it next month, but for many people, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be rough. So when we have it in a natal chart, there's a lot of that energy as well, that cleansing, purification, detoxification that we have with Pluto, and then that dealing with reality and limitation that is inherent in physical reality that we have with Saturn. And so Amy Lee embodies this Saturn-Pluto energy. She carries it with her. She has carried it with her throughout her entire life. She will carry it with her throughout the entire rest of her life. She embodies it, And so I think a big part of her life is indeed about this kind of, as I mentioned earlier with other things, but it comes up here again, this exploration of the darker areas of life, dealing with difficult realities and limitations, having to go through really intense transformations and catharsis and cleansing of what is not working and things of this nature. It's some rough energy, and you could even theorize, especially since she has the midpoint of this conjunction at 23 of Libra, that next month's Saturn-Pluto conjunction at 22 of Capricorn is going to be quite powerful for her personally. And the reason for that is the midpoint of her Saturn-Pluto conjunction, 23 of Libra, is in nearly an exact square to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction happening next month, which I believe is at 22 of Capricorn. I'm actually just going to double check that real quick. 12th, 2020. Yes, 22 degrees, 47 minutes of Capricorn is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction next month. And it's actually on January 12th, kind of January 11th, 12th, I guess. I was saying January 11th before, but it's kind of 11th, 12th, I guess. So literally it's only 1 degree from perfectly squaring the midpoint of her Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and squares indicate internal conflicts. So I would say this is likely to surface again for her. Now we're doing a bit of predictive astrology already, I guess. Likely to surface again for her next month, but also probably something that's already been surfacing for her, perhaps throughout this entire year, because this is a very slow-moving, long-term transit aspect. It's not like it January 12th comes and it's like, oh, okay, you're doomed to the hell realms of Pluto today. It's like, no, this likely started for her sometime in 2019, this year, probably early mid 2019 roughly, and it's probably going to be influencing her throughout much of, if not all of, next year, 2020. And it's interesting, by the way, I don't know if this is related or not, but just for the hell of it, I will mention it, that she, with Evanescence, is going on tour with Within Temptation next year, or at the very least, they're going to play some shows together, or a show together. I don't know. I forget the details. All I know is that there's kind of this monumental thing that has a lot of people excited, where Evanescence and Within Temptation are going to play, at least I think at least a few shows together. I don't know. I can't remember what the details are, but they're going to play together is the point. And that's quite monumental. And that's, of course, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction transit next month is taking place in Capricorn, which is her 7th house of relationships and partnerships. And so that could even theoretically be a partnership like with, say, another band, or the lead singer of another band, like her and Sharon Den Adele of Within Temptation appearing together. And so I think it's interesting. It's almost like saying, oh, well, that's where this is going. You know what I mean? It's like there's going to be this sort of epoch-making event in her 7th house of like public partnerships, if you will. All right, so let's see what we can dive into next. I will say, actually, I'll say a couple more things about her natal Saturn-Pluto conjunction that are very interesting. First of all, the great intensity of her Saturn-Pluto conjunction may be mitigated somewhat by the fact that she has it in Libra, which is an air sign. So it may give her some sense of intellectual detachment from the intensity of it and make it maybe a little easier to deal with, I would say. And also, of course, then that makes it ruled by Libra, by Venus, Venus, the ruler of Libra, which Venus essentially blesses everything that Venus touches. And so you have maybe a somewhat easier go with that Saturn Pluto, but hey, at the end of the day, of course, it's still Saturn Pluto. Now, another thing I want to say with this, this would be the second of all thing I want to say that is quite interesting. So I'm going to show this on my tablet as well. Well, so first of, I keep saying that, sorry. One thing I want to say also before this next main point is that she has it in her 4th house of home family. And so it is also quite possible that this is a life where, again, and it reminds me of her North Node in Cancer, though in my opinion, it's never a good idea to mix up the signs with the houses, but here it kind of works. That a big part of her life in this life is all of this like intense transformation around the home with family on the domestic front when it comes to all of the private world, the personal world, all of these like family and home matters essentially. But here's the other thing I was getting to. So you can see on this chart here that her Saturn-Pluto conjunction is basically squaring her ascendant and North Node, as well as her South Node. So let me just show that here. And it is, of course, forming what we call a T-square. So a very interesting thing about a T-square that I've heard is that when you have it, since it's kind of like a 3-legged table that's missing a 4th leg, it's going to push you into the area where that 4th leg would be, speaking analogously here. So in Amy Lee's chart, that just so happens to be her 10th house of career, where she also has her midheaven, which also talks about one's career and main calling in life, which is very often the case, of course, with the midheaven, but not always, particularly, well, with whole sign houses that we are using. So consider this. This is like saying that the combined force of the intensity of her Saturn-Pluto conjunction, maybe some difficult tragedies in her life, particularly around like the home and family, emotional issues that she may have to deal with. There is an emotional component to the fourth house as well. Again, similar to the sign of Cancer, but don't conflate the signs and houses if you want my advice. And then, that said, the North Node ascendant conjunction in Cancer, in the sign of Cancer, and the issues surrounding that, and also her South Node in Capricorn, maybe bringing some trauma or difficulties from past lives into this life. All this stuff is combining, and I almost want to say especially that Saturn-Pluto stuff, difficulties around the home and family, or intense events that require a lot of catharsis, a lot of healing, and whatever around the home and family, are catapulting her into that 10th house, that area of career. So isn't that interesting? Because here's the thing. It's not every person we see, that ends up becoming not just successful in music, but successful in more or less the mainstream of music. I mean, I'm not sure, I guess, what Evanescence is considered these days. Like, I wouldn't be one to know, but I do know that, like, back in the day, at least, when they got big, like in 2003 or so, they were mainstream. They were mainstream as fuck, like, question about it. And so I think what we're seeing here about Amy Lee, this is big. So if you haven't been paying attention, pay attention to what I'm about to say. I think a very big part of, or reason why she became so successful in her career in this life is because it was fueled by the intense pain, intense trauma, perhaps even, not just that she experienced this life and personally, more in her personal and private life, but maybe even perhaps in past lives, as we see again with the South Node in Capricorn. So, and this gets into a whole bunch of things, I know, but this, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but this is basically the nature of physical reality. I've been thinking a lot lately about it, sort of the rubber band analogy. You pull the rubber band back really, really far, and that represents the amount of trauma or pain. And the more you have, the farther back you pull the rubber band, and the farther back you pull the rubber band, the farther it flies when you finally let go of it. And now I'm not saying that's for sure the path that Amy Lee has taken in her career, but I wouldn't be surprised. Her astrological data deeply appears to indicate it. Again, we only have a Saturn-Pluto conjunction every 30-some years. This is not a common aspect. And she's got some difficult squares to it as well. Its only mitigation is the fact that it's in Libra and ruled by Venus, I would say. Not to mention, it is in what is called an angular house. The fourth, or the, I misspoke. The 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th, which are said to be like the most powerful houses. It's in her 4th house. So there you go. All right. So let's move forward here. Yeah, I'm definitely going over my allotted time at this point because this is just too interesting. Speaking of the healing of wounds, as well as T-squares or T-crosses, looking at her chart, you may notice that she has her Chiron, wounded healer Chiron, in Taurus and in her 11th house. So Chiron in Taurus, that's taking the idea of the healing of wounds, or how we heal the wounds in other people to try to heal the wounds in ourselves. And it's taking it into Taurian energy, which is very practical, very down to earth, very steady, very consistent. But Taurus, of course, is also ruled by Venus, music and art. And so we have yet another connection between her healing of her wounds, her catharsis, her perhaps maybe even finding forgiveness or letting go of things with her music, her art, that Venus rulership. And remember, of course, it's not just that Venus rules Taurus, the sign that Chiron is in, it's that Chiron in and of itself is ruled by Venus in her chart, is ruled by her Venus, which she has in Aquarius and in her eighth house of, dark things and death. And then, of course, Aquarius being different, being very unique and detached and intellectual. And so, as if to say, yet again, that she heals not only her own wounds, but helps heal the wounds of other people through her music, through her art. And I would say that's very, very, very accurate. Just listen to an Evanescence album and, there will be no doubt in your mind about that. That's for damn sure. It's also very interesting that her Chiron in her 11th house trines her south node. And so, again, a trine, powerful energetic connection. There may be a powerful connection between her healing of wounds in this life and her unresolved trauma from past lives. Interesting stuff. I also should mention before I forget that, of course, that Chiron is in her 11th house, which talks about friends and community and social networking and that sort of thing, as if to say that the area of life that she helps heal wounds in is those of her friends and community, and how she sort of networks with people, or how do I put this? The 11th house is opposed to the 12th house of isolation. And so it's like saying Chiron in the 11th, she heals wounds in a more open sense, in a more community-driven sense, as opposed to doing so just in the shadows. She doesn't just heal wounds privately, she also heals wounds in a way that is very social or connected with other people, if that makes sense. At least that would be the astrological theory that I would derive from that. Okay, so let's see here. Speaking of theories, let's see, what was I going to say about Sun in her 6th house? Well, this would be just a theory. I don't know. I'd have to think about this one some more, but just for the hell of it, let's just entertain this idea real quick, because it does end up fitting. When we look at her 6th house, one area of life that the 6th house talks about is that of subordinates. Like, say, you're an employer and you have then employees. Like, your 6th house would be where your employees are. You'd have your employees would be represented there. Well, it almost seems like then fans of an artist or a group of artists could show up in the 6th house. Again, this is why I'm saying this is just a theory of mine. Well, if we look at Amy Lee's 6th house to say perhaps what her fans look like, we see Uranus, the Sun, Mercury, and Neptune. We've got Uranus at 1 degree of her 6th house, Sagittarius, and her aforementioned Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction. So Uranus, what is Uranus? Uranus is very different, unique, unpredictable, as if to say that Amy Lee attracts fans who are very different, unique, and unpredictable. And also Uranian energy is very much connected with this futuristic energy, kind of like the energy of the internet and technology and stuff like that. The new young generation, the young and rebellious. I'd say that's pretty accurate for the kinds of fans she has seemed to attract, in my humble opinion. And then, of course, we have that Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction, which Amy Lee embodies in and of herself. But you could also say that she theoretically, if we're going to go with this theory of mine, attracts fans who are very much identified with being highly creative, Mercury, Neptune, and very communicative, or have a lot of mental activity, Mercury, and also very spiritual, very into like mysterious, sort of otherworldly, or maybe even like supernatural things like we have with the Neptune energy. So that's as far as I'm going to go with that. Believe me, I could go further, but I don't want to I don't want to go too deep into that in case I'm a little off base there. All right, so what else can we cover? I'm gonna have to cut down, or cut down on some of the things that we cover here, just so that we don't run out of time. Okay, well, there is another very interesting thing here. Looking at her Jupiter in Scorpio again. Let me make sure I get this just right here as I'm interpreting it. Okay. Wait a second. All right. Sorry, I had to make sure I get this exactly right before I go saying something and then messing it up. So her Jupiter in Scorpio forms another one of these T squares or T crosses. But in this case, her Jupiter is squaring her Leo moon, and it's also squaring her Venus, and it's in her 5th house. So again, this is like the three-legged table. What area of the chart is it pushing her towards? It's pushing her towards her 11th house, opposite the 5th. And that is yet again where she has her Chiron, wounded healer. So this, again, we have this connection of like the idea of the healing of wounds being something that she is pushed into in this life, almost, whether she likes it or not, essentially. Fortunately, though, since both Jupiter and Venus, very positive, easy to work with energies, are involved in this, classically known as the two benefics, it's probably overall not too difficult of a thing to deal with, I would say, at least that part of it. The Saturn-Pluto thing, that is where the real difficulty lies. But her Jupiter with her Venus and her Leo moon, Venus again talking about her art, her music, pushing her into the healing of wounds. Not as difficult, but still an area of tension. All right, so what else can we talk about here? I feel like I'm going to wrap this up soon because I feel like this is getting quite lengthy, even though there's just so many things that can be talked about here. It's crazy. Let me point out that her moon, going back to her Leo moon in the 2nd house, is trine her Uranus, the weird planet, the different planet, the unpredictable planet, saying that those subconscious Leo drives, her being all out in the open, her area of life, or the aspect of her that's sort of about being in the spotlight, is very much connected to being different, being unique, all that Uranian, like unexpected, sudden, shocking energy, perhaps, that sort of thing. Let's see what else. Talked about her Neptune, talked about her Pluto. Okay, let's talk about the angular houses real quick, or at least the ones that we haven't gone into detail about here, because, like I mentioned before, those are very important. So, her first house of self, which talks all about the area of life that is oneself, the individual, includes your physical body, your sort of personality, that sort of thing. Um, what you like see yourself as. It is, of course, in the sign of Cancer, as I mentioned. And so, first of all, she's going to very much identify herself with this idea of Cancerian energy, deep emotional things, being caring, nurturing, understanding the depths of emotional realities, seeking security, perhaps even. And again, it's weird though, because this of course, while this will embody herself personally and even her physical body and stuff like that, it's in contrast with her sense of self or ego, perhaps, that we see with her sun being in Sagittarius in conjunct her Mercury and Neptune. So sun in Sagittarius again, um, identifying herself as very inspirational, enthusiastic, idealistic, highly creative, conjunct Mercury and Neptune, also more creativity, thinking outside the box and very like into the spiritual, otherworldly realms, all that kind of stuff. It's an interesting contrast, basically. Um, Cancer versus Sagittarius. However, that first house is ruled by her Leo moon, her moon in Leo. And so again, moon in Leo is all that Leo energy, like, maybe subtle or kind of subconscious because it's the moon, but it's still Leo, being in the spotlight, being the performer, being bold and dramatic and intense and following inspiration and that sort of thing. That means that she's also, by that definition of things, um, going to have that Leo moon energy really color or influence her first house of self. So her first house of self is going to be, on the one hand, very Cancerian, all into the depths of emotions and caring and nurturing and that sort of thing. But that's going to be colored or influenced very much by her moon in Leo, bold, showy, dramatic, that sort of thing. And of course, what do we have? With Amy Lee, um, she is indeed like the star of Evanescence. She's the most well-known member of that band. That's just the way it is, like it or not. So we have that. Also, I hate to do this, but I'm going to need to take like a very quick little break because I need to turn my heater down real quick and like stabilize a bit. So if you're watching after the fact, feel free to fast forward by 1 minute. But yeah, let me go take care of these things. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back now. Sorry for that little interruption. Let's try to avoid those. So, we were talking about her Cancer ascendant, or her first house being Cancer, and then it being ruled by Leo. And so she's got both Cancer and Leo things for her first house. When we get to secondary progressions, which I hope we do soon because this stream is going way over, a lot longer than I kind of thought. Well, I actually kind of expected it to be long because there's a lot to be said about this chart. But when we get to the area of secondary progressions, we will see that her secondary progressed ascendant has already, has for a very long time, well before she became well known for her music, um, entered the sign of Leo. And so you could also say that from that perhaps there's even more of that Leo energy of being in the spotlight, being very passionate and full of inspiration, all that stuff we've already kind of been over. All right, so of course her fourth house, the next angular house, we have talked about a lot here with, I would say, a lot of difficulties, upheavals around the home and family with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I wasn't sure if I should bring this up, and I'm still not sure if I should now because it's such a tragedy and a touchy subject and a sensitive issue. But I guess I'll mention it very briefly, and I hope that's okay. I hope this doesn't bother anyone or whatever. But this is, well, what I'm about to mention is a part of life. Tragedies do happen to people, and they happen for whatever reasons that they happen. Well, from what I recall, reading about Amy Lee in the past, or like hearing about her, is that she lost her sister when she was very young. And Saturn, Pluto in the fourth house of home and family, I would say could quite possibly indicate that kind of tragedy, unfortunately. And then when we look at her third house of siblings, also, by the way, having Mars, which is in traditional astrology known as a malefic planet, being there, that could also be suggestive of difficulties or, unwanted things, tragic things, perhaps even happening in the area of siblings. And then we look at that. Let's see, what else was I going to say about that? Give me one moment, please. Well, I guess we'll just leave it at that, essentially. I mean, there is more that I could talk about in reference to that may indicate that happened in her life, but I mean, I think that's enough said about that. A Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the fourth house natally, it is going to indicate the likelihood of tragedies, and I guess depending on who you ask, some will say that we have the free will to be able to prevent such things. Others will say we pretty much don't have the free will to prevent such things, and they're going to happen no matter what we do. I don't know for sure. I think that some things are unavoidable, though. But anyway, like I said, I wasn't. What the hell did I just do to this window? Hang on. Okay, it's all right. I think, yeah. Like I said, I wasn't even sure if I should bring that up, but I guess I feel like I would be ignoring a very big part of her life and kind of what made her who she is if I didn't bring it up and mention it, especially when we're talking about Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the fourth house of home and family. Tragedy around the home and family be kind of like ignoring the elephant in the room or whatever. But anyway, let's move on. So let's see here. Next, let us look at her next angular house, which is her 7th house of relationships and partnerships, representing who she is likely to enter into any kind of direct relationship with, back and forth relationship in life, not necessarily just romantic relationships, but also like partnerships and things of this nature. First house is self in contrast to the seventh house of other, or you can say 7th house is other in contrast to the first house of self. Well, she has her 7th house aligned with Capricorn via whole sign houses, indicating, first of all, this idea of a lot of Capricorn energy, not necessarily Capricorns or just Capricorns, but Capricorn energy in those that she enters into various kinds of relationships with in this life. But then we can see, because it's Capricorn, it's also ruled by Saturn, which, as I have already mentioned, is located in her 4th house and in Libra. And so she's likely to encounter a lot of people with that Saturn in Libra energy, which is like, on the one hand, perhaps kind of sweet and loving the way Libra is, but also like very detached and objective and rational about things, Libra being an air sign. But then also with Saturn perhaps being austere or reality oriented, or maybe in like on the negative side of things, being a bit pessimistic or fatalistic, that sort of thing. So it's an interesting contrast, because Amy Lee herself seems to be primarily, well, no, I would say based on her chart, she is primarily very inspirational and creative and passionate and emotional. I would say that she sees things through much more of an emotional and sort of subjective perspective, which is one of the few things that the energy of Sagittarius and Cancer have in common. Hey there, Ryan. Welcome back. One of the few things that those two signs have in common. So Amy Lee may see things in this way, this very like emotional, passionate way, but those that she is likely to find herself in relationships with are kind of the opposite. They are instead very detached, very practical, very maybe even cold in some cases. But the saving grace of it, though, is of course, Saturn in Libra ruling her 7th house. Libra being ruled by Venus is also that sweet, loving energy. And so I think that I don't know everything about her life, of course, but I think she's married now. I'm pretty damn sure she's married. I'm like almost completely certain of that. I would say that with her 7th house being ruled by her Saturn in Libra, that Libran energy, she's probably found someone who, while maybe very practical and reality oriented, is probably also very sweet and loving, with that Venus ruled Libra involved. Glad to be back, Mr. Poetic. I am glad that you are glad to be back. No, I seriously am. I've just been sort of streaming into the void here for a bit, I think, but that's okay. I'm getting great joy out of doing streams like these. So whether one person watches or 1 million people watch, whatever, I'm happy. Or hell, even if no one watched, I would be happy. So yeah, that's what we have with her 7th house. Let's see, can anything else be said about that? Well, the fact that that Saturn in Libra is also in her 4th house would mean that another, I guess, plus side, at least theoretically, this would be my theoretical interpretation, would be that those that she enters into relationships with, including whoever she married, again, I'm pretty sure she's married right now, would be like very, very concerned also about the home and family, with the fourth house being there, and sort of focusing on the realities of that. Hell, they might even be someone who prefers to stay at home. I don't know that for sure. That's just speculation, but it could be. So what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, on the more negative or potentially concerning side, while the seventh house is known for relationships and marriage and that sort of thing, it's also known as the house of open enemies, like public enemies. And so I don't know if Amy Lee really has any public enemies, but if she did, they would probably be of that Saturn in Libra nature. Those who are very reality oriented, as opposed to her being more kind of intuition or emotion oriented, which is interesting, by the way, because I do remember in 2003, 2004, somewhere in there, when one of the members of Evanescence split from the band, Ben Moody, I believe was his name. Apparently, if I'm remembering correctly, it was because he was much more focused on the business aspect of the band Evanescence, whereas Amy Lee was much more focused upon the art aspect, which would be, Cancer plus Sagittarius plus Leo energy versus Saturn and Libra ruling Capricorn energy, totally, with Amy Lee, of course, being Cancer, Leo, and Sagittarius, and Ben Moody being like Capricorn, Saturn, and Libra. So there you go. Apparently, Ben Moody was also, ironically enough, diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I believe I remember reading, which is weird because his last name is Moody. So don't say that names don't have an influence on whatever. If anything, her public enemies could just be them darn record suits. Yeah, maybe. Well, if we have time, we may take a closer look at her 12th house of hidden enemies. The 7th house is public enemies. The 12th house is hidden enemies. So we could get a little more information on what maybe goes on in the shadows of Amy Lee's life. But let's see here. Also, we could, I know we already talked about the nodes, but we could look closer at that south node in the 7th house and say, kind of like the theories I mentioned earlier, if we're going to say that the south node may represent trauma from past lives, well, the fact that it's in her 7th house could also indicate that she experienced some intense relationship trauma in past lives that she has carried into this life. And that may then in and of itself be connected with her her north node in Cancer, her life purpose being connected to exploring those emotional realities. You know what I mean? So that's how she's sort of transforming or transmuting that past trauma. There's also the idea that the south node is what we put out into the world automatically. And so it could almost be saying like, well, here's an interpretation anyway. It could be saying that to her, to Amy Lee, her art is what she puts out into the world automatically, and her fans are kind of like the other half of the relationship, if that makes sense. Like she puts herself, north node in the first house, her life purpose in her first house of self, and in Cancer, all of that emotion. She puts all of her emotion and herself into her North Node, her life purpose, her art and music, if we're gonna kind of assume that it is that. And then she releases it into the world, South Node in Capricorn, the sign of career and like sort of great success and manifestation, making things real, basically. Almost in the way that or almost as if to say that she sees the world or her fan base as like someone she's in a relationship with. Is this making some sense? I hope so. Let's see. Needed something positive to focus on, so I'm happy you're streaming tonight. Oh, good. Well, I'm happy to be here. Believe me, I know how it is. I freaking know how it is when you just kind of need a temporary escape from the sort of rigors of physical reality, the challenges of physical reality, which, by the way, I've been thinking about this more and more recently. Just as an aside, since this has kind of been brought up, and we could even connect this to Amy Lee's chart as well. And advice I give anyone with intense challenges is, I would say see challenges as they just are what they are. I think a lot of times we're much more stressed out by the resistance we have to difficult things, challenges, than the actual difficult things, challenges themselves. In other words, if we see the challenges as a necessary and inherent part of our life path, as opposed to an interruption in our life path, then it's far easier to release resistance to them, make peace with them, and then it's just far easier to deal with them. So that's how I would say. Anyway, many bands face a split like that. Indeed. Funny enough, I was supposed to attend a jam session tonight with my band. That is funny. Well, here we are on Friday the 13th. I don't know, maybe, weird things are happening. But due to my situation, I had to decline, which really bummed me out. That does suck. It makes sense. Okay, the stuff I was saying just now makes sense. That's good. Yeah, it's like you could interpret the South Node in the 7th house as like she sees her fan base as someone that she is in a very meaningful relationship with, which would also fit having a Cancer ascendant regardless, very caring, nurturing energy that she embodies, literally. She is all about herself. But yeah, I mean, that thing I just mentioned about her split with Ben Moody many, many years ago in Evanescence, I think also really highlights her also being a Sagittarius, Sun in Sagittarius, Sun, Mercury conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius. You know what I mean? Because Sagittarius is probably the most idealistic sign of the zodiac, and that's often opposed, or you could say often in contrast to Capricorn, it's very reality oriented, It's like Sagittarius is much more about beliefs and having faith in oneself, whereas Capricorn is about the reality of things. Sagittarius is optimism, whereas Capricorn is pessimism. So interesting stuff there, I would say. All right, let's see what else. Yeah, by the way, speaking of my streaming right now, I normally wouldn't be streaming at this time because typically I've had dinner by now, or I'm in the process of eating dinner by now, but this stream was just too good. So, and I got started kind of late because of some technical difficulties. And so I'm just saying screw it and delaying things. So I also wanted to mention again about Jupiter in her 5th house. There is a technique in astrology where we can, there's multiple techniques, but one of them, probably the simplest one for determining the children that someone has and what each child is like, is to simply look at what planets are in the fifth house of children. So, and yes, we are going to return to the angular houses, but I want to talk about this first before I forget. So, she has one planet and one planet only in her fifth house using whole sign houses, and that is Jupiter. Now, actually, I should have looked this up before the stream, but I'm not sure how many children she has, and I don't know if that's publicly available, but let's find out. How many children does Amy Lee have?
Just one. Amy Lee's child is Jack Lyon Hartzler.
Well, you heard it from Google. Just one, and I mean, that could always theoretically change, I suppose, but in her fifth house of children, she has just one planet as well, and it's Jupiter. So I would say if we were to take this idea a step further, right? The fact that it's Jupiter, that Jupiter is representing her child, I would say that her child, Jack, I believe it said his name was, will grow up to be someone who embodies that Jupiterian energy, much like his mother, funny enough, because she's Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, which again, Jupiter, all about belief systems, philosophy, knowledge, expansive and optimistic, and about positive thinking. You know, Jupiter is much more interested in the belief and faith in oneself, kind of like I was mentioning earlier with Sagittarius, whereas Saturn, ruling Capricorn, is more interested in the facts and the reality. So I would say there's a good chance that this child will embody that energy, but we can take even that a step further and say, what rules her fifth house of children? What is presiding over this child? It is, in fact, Mars, because her Jupiter is in Scorpio. It is Mars in her third house and in Virgo. And so we could say that while her child Jack will likely grow up to be very Jupiterian-like, probably already very Jupiterian-like, he's also likely to embody that Mars and Virgo energy. That'll be colored by that Mars and Virgo energy. So Mars, assertive, aggressive, willing to take action, willing to push forward. And of course, I mean, maybe I could even find his chart. I don't know if that's if that's something I can access publicly or not, but I'll check it in a minute. But Mars and Virgo taking that energy into a very precision, laser focused Virgoan thing, very practical, very analytical. And so I guess you put all that together and it's like someone who is very interested in knowledge and beliefs and philosophy and optimism and positive thinking, that kind of stuff himself, but also very much one who prioritizes focusing on things in a very practical way, who prioritizes figuring things out, who prioritizes looking at all the details of things and figuring things out by looking at all the details of things. That would just be my theoretical interpretation. But here, let's do this real quick. Let's Google search, see if we can find out his birthday. Is that possible? No, it is not. It just says he was born in 2014. Or wait. Okay. Yeah. So it says here that Amy Lee announced Jack's arrival on July 28th, 2014, with his birth being 4 days prior. So July 24th, 2014. Okay. So I wasn't planning on doing this, but just for the hell of it, real quick, we'll even look at her son Jack's birth date and data. Just real quick. I won't spend too much time on this. Just for the hell of it. July 24th, 2014. We'll just put 12 p.m. Close enough for our purposes here. Oh my God. You guys aren't going to believe this. In fact, I'm going to pull it up on my tablet so you know that I'm not lying. He has a Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Leo. That means Sun-Jupiter conjunction. I was just mentioning how her child is likely to be all about Jupiterian energy. Sun-Jupiter conjunction means that your sense of self is tied up in Jupiter things. You can't make this shit up. And I'm gonna show you guys right now. Which, if you want, you can just, well, you could go to planetwatcher.com yourself and just type in July 24th, 2014. And you can also just Google Amy Lee child and look at his birthday if you don't believe me. Hang on, though. Where the fuck are we here? Yeah, that's just incredible. And in Leo, no less, which is another fire sign, not quite Sagittarius, but still very inspirational, very sort of dramatic and all of that, ruled by the sun. Hang on. Okay, Planet Watcher. Jeez, this is incredible. July 24th, 2014. Okay, wait, let me make sure that's entered in. Okay, we'll just leave it at 12 a.m. All right, so actually, no, we'll put it at halfway through the day, 12 p.m. Sorry, I'm a perfectionist. 12 p.m. The only thing that's ever really going to affect is the moon, because everything else moves too slowly. All right, so here it is. I'm not lying. I'm not making this up. You can see right there, as soon as it focuses, I'm going to hold this differently so I can hold it more still. July 24th, 2014. And you can see right there at the bottom of the page in Leo, a Sun-Jupiter conjunction. So there you have it. YouTube is censoring you through a badly timed connection. Oh no, that sucks. Well, like I said, you guys can, if that didn't show up, you can figure this out yourself. Just Google Amy Lee child and it'll show when his birth was announced, and then it says 4 days prior. So then it's July 24th, 2014. And then just go to planetwatcher.com, type in July 24th, 2014 to get the exact transits for that day. And you will see for yourself a Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Leo, meaning that his sense of self is very much wrapped up with the idea of Jupiterian things. And Amy Lee has one planet and one planet only in her 5th house of children, and it is none other than Jupiter, meaning that her child theoretically should be very much about this Jupiterian energy. So there you have it. Now, let me just briefly look at some other parts of his chart. Interestingly enough, he almost certainly himself has the moon in Cancer as well, unless, let's see, he was born in some odd part of the world and at a very, very early time that day. But yeah, he almost certainly has the moon in Cancer as well, which is funny because that's more that Cancerian energy, just like his mom, Amy Lee. Let's see, what else? Let me see if that Mars and Virgo energy is coming out here in any way, shape, or form. One moment. Well, his natal Mars is in Libra, funny enough, which is also an air sign. So again, this is just like a sort of preliminary analysis, but oh, that's interesting. So, okay, 2 things. First of all, his Mars is at 29 of Libra. Libra is also an air sign that also analyzes things, not in the way that Virgo does. Virgo is the laser precision analysis. Libra is like, okay, let's look at both sides objectively kind of thing. And so Mars in Libra is kind of that, like let's be diplomatic or whatever. But it's also that intellectual objective energy. Another thing though, that Sun Jupiter conjunction that I was just talking about is actually in a square with his Mars. And so in Amy Lee's chart, her fifth house of children contains one planet Jupiter representing theoretically her child itself. That house ruled by her Mars in Virgo, saying that should also represent her child. Well, it just so happens that her child, Jack, has not only that Sun-Jupiter conjunction, but has that Sun-Jupiter conjunction in a square with his Mars, associating the planetary energy of Mars in Libra, also an air sign, with his sense of self. Extremely similar to the indications given, I would say, in Amy Lee's chart. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. All right. So let's see. That's interesting. One final thing I'll say about her son's chart that I find very fascinating is that he was born with a grand water trine from Mercury to Saturn to Chiron. There's a lot that could be said about this, but grand water trines are like these sort of superconductive emotional connections, essentially. And the fact that it involves Mercury means it'll involve his mind. Saturn, it'll involve reality and limitation. Chiron means it'll involve the healing of wounds. And all of those issues should theoretically be connected in his life. Now, that Mercury, in addition to that, is also square to his Uranus and Aries. And so, and almost exact, in fact, it's less than a degree away from being exact. So Mercury square Uranus is like this mental tension, and it can be like new ideas that can be potentially problematic at times. It's a lot of tense mental energy, basically. So he's got that going on, for one thing. Now, this grand water trine, going back to that, is actually in a kite formation with Pluto at the opposite end. And they call it a kite because it looks like a literal kite. Like if you pull this up for yourself, you will see. Wait a second. Oh, he's got oh my God, he's got a double grand water trine, or what is really a double kite when we add in his Venus with Pluto at the opposite end of both. Okay, I'm going to try to rush through this because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But so, okay, we look at Venus at 7 of Cancer, also in Cancer, co-present with Mercury and very likely his moon. His Venus trines his Mars, trines his Neptune, trines his Venus again. Now, with Venus being at 7 of Cancer and Mercury being at 15 of Cancer and Pluto being at 11 of Capricorn, Pluto is like halfway between those points. So they're both in this kite formation. They're both pointing to Pluto. So what the hell does all this mean? Basically, well, I would say it could mean a lot of things, but it's interesting that it's all pointing back to Pluto in Capricorn. So theoretically, his life is likely to be a highly transformative one. Being the son of Amy Lee, I guess, would be quite the powerful thing in and of itself. So, draw what conclusions you will, but that's a powerful chart I just looked at. Maybe sometimes I feel like I'm tempted to say that a lot of times about people's charts because I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. That's interesting. But you don't see a double kite every day. That's for damn sure. All right. Oh, it showed up. Oh, good. Gotta love these roller coaster moments in the streams. Thank you. I guess I can't help it because my passion for astrology is so intense. Like, I mean, I could be tired as hell and it would still likely come out. And that's kind of what's happening tonight. I can't help myself. It's my highest excitement. So anyway, let's move on here. Let's go back to Amy Lee's chart and see what area we can look at next. Wait a minute. Let's see that Jupiter square her Venus and square her moon. I almost wonder if, since her Jupiter is in a T square, T cross in her 5th house, I wonder if catapulting into the 11th house, I almost wonder if like her sun might end up becoming something of a social media star one day or something of that nature, since it would be her 11th house of social networking. I don't know. We're going to move on though. Okay, so moving on to the next angular house, which are the most powerful houses. That would be her 10th house of career. We've already mentioned this significantly, but let's go over it again, just briefly at least. It is, of course, in Aries, trailblazing Aries. It's ruled by her Mars in Virgo. And so Mars, of course, says it wants to push forward into the new. And so she's essentially, I would say, very motivated about her career in this life. Mars is what motivates us, what we prioritize, what we want to take action on, what we put first is what our Mars is connected to, where our Mars is and what it's connected to. Remember, of course, also her Mars is trying to her Venus, as I mentioned earlier, Venus being art and music. She prioritizes her and her music. And she's very passionate about it too with that Mars. That Mars is also in a sextile to her moon, the ruler of her 1st house of self, just adding a lot of emotion and passion to her Mars motivation for her career, and also her music, very much connected to her career. Oh yeah, I wanted to say this earlier also. So when I was looking at her chart before, when I pulled it up like the other week, and I was kind of contemplating doing a stream like this, that Mars-Venus trine is very interesting because it's like the masculine and feminine energies harmonizing. Mars and Venus, Venus and Mars, they are the cosmic lovers. And so it's like saying that in Amy Lee's life, either, how do I say this? It's not that she should automatically have good luck with love, because there's a lot of other stuff going on too that in her chart that is indicating the likelihood for complications in that area. But it's like the idea of love, the experience of love and attraction and all of that is very potent in her chart. It's very powerful in her life, So I guess I'll just leave that at that. All right. So interestingly enough, however, looking at the most commonly used aspects, the major ones plus quincunxes basically, and sesquisquares and half squares, her midheaven doesn't actually aspect anything. But I'm going to do something real quick. And I meant to do this before the stream, but I forgot. Sorry. I'm going to, on my astrology program real quick, I'm going to pull up septiles and quintiles, which are very rare aspects, and just see if maybe she has any of those to her midheaven, giving us some more information about her career. This may or may not work. I have no idea. Or it may or may not yield information, I mean to say. I have no idea. Okay, so where the fuck are we? I don't even... When I upgraded my computer recently, it kind of erased some data, unfortunately. And so I'm going to have to do this in a really haphazard way, but I think I can do it. Okay. Oh, there we go. I can actually see it now. Okay. Wait, let me make it bigger. Sorry, you guys. Okay, there we go. All right, so she has, wow, there's some aspects in here that I've never used before, but she has one aspect that I do look at, or well, I have looked at a lot before, along with other things, and that is a biseptile from her midheaven to her ascendant. So theoretically, septiles, well, they are esoteric aspects, I guess. They're aspects that I guess a lot of astrologers use, but I think more are beginning to use because we can calculate them with computers. They're not easy to calculate by hand, but they have to do with the idea theoretically of fate, of fateful developments. So Amy Lee having this biseptile from her midheaven to her ascendant, from her midheaven in Aries to her ascendant in Cancer, theoretically means that she is very much predisposed to fateful developments in her life between her career, midheaven, and her self-expression, her outer self, ascendant. And I think that's pretty much what we've seen. Plus, we have the ascendant and the north node being conjunct, also theoretically indicating a life that is highly fated, a very fateful life in general. Let's see, any other septiles or quintiles here that I might want to talk about. There's a biquintile, a creative aspect between her Chiron, wounded healer, and her Sun, Mercury-Neptune conjunction. There's a septile between her Uranus and South Node, fateful developments involving her being different and her sort of past life issues that she's brought into this life, and or what she puts out into the world. I could go over this in more detail, but we're just going to switch back to the regular aspects now. So one moment, please. One moment. Okay. So that's basically it for her 10th house. Let's move on to, like I said earlier, I mean, we've covered all the angular houses now, 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th. But let's look at that 12th house of hidden enemies. Let's see what's going on in the hidden realms of Amy Lee's life that we can find out through astrology. So her 12th house is Gemini, ruled by Mercury. And that Mercury, of course, is conjunct her Sun and Neptune. And let's see here. Aspects to her Mercury, along with that conjunction, include, in particular, wait, what the fuck am I seeing here, basically? Sextiles from her Saturn and Pluto to it. And quincunxes to her ascendant and north node, or at the very least her north node. It's almost a bit, I mean, it depends how wide of an orb you use, but what's probably going to be most significant there will be the conjunctions with, or the conjunction with the Sun and Neptune, and also the sextiles to Saturn and Pluto. So the area that is hidden in her life, the area of also isolation and hidden enemies, all of this is actually connected to her Mercury, which is her mind, okay? But that's also connected to her Sun, her ego or sense of self, and her Neptune, spirituality, creativity, the other worldly realms, all of that. And all of this in Sagittarius, this idealistic, highly creative, inspired energy. And so, well, that to me shows her being creative in the 12th house, isolation, her being, what's the clearest way to say this? It shows to me her being creative, Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction in Sagittarius in isolation or in the hidden realms of life, the 12th house. And then, of course, as we know, bringing that 12th house stuff ruled by Mercury, communication, and also vocalizing, singing, into the outer realms, into the light of day. Mercury, the ruler of it, conjunct the sun and also conjunct Neptune. Which is weird, though, because in a way it's almost like saying, well, yes, it's being brought out into the light of the sun, but then Neptune is like there sort of dissolving it. And then, of course, you have the name Evanescence, which talks about sort of a dissipation, as if, smoke into the air or whatever. So there's a lot of theoretical conclusions we could draw from that. Now, we must also consider, of course, this opens up a whole new dimension of things. My God, there's so much we can say about this chart. It's unreal. We also must consider the sextiles from that Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction to her Saturn and Pluto, as if to say that Saturn, the death, the reality, the limit, the cold, hard facts, and Pluto, also death, but also the deep, dark, unconscious realms, transformation, catharsis, purification, cleansing. All of this is connected to her hidden life as well, what she does in isolation. What else was I going to say about that? Like what she does in isolation, and then, of course, what she brings out into the open through her creativity, as I would theorize, through her Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction. Of course, again, though, it also is going to represent hidden enemies. And so, a sextile is a positive aspect. It's an easy aspect. And so that's good. That would say like, oh, Saturn is stabilizing things. Pluto is adding great passion, perhaps, and extremity to these things, which is very good for that creative side of her, creating, Saturn, make it real Saturn in isolation. Then she makes it real by bringing it out into the world. But if we're going to consider, okay, well, who are her hidden enemies? Who are these people? I would say that they are likely very mercurial in nature. They are likely themselves quite possibly creative. They may be tricksters. Mercury's the trickster. How about that? Tricksters are her hidden enemies. Deceivers. And then the sextiles to Saturn and Pluto, well, forces of limitation perhaps are her enemy. Forces of great power, Pluto, plutocracy could be her hidden enemies, these sorts of things. I'm kind of just speculating at this point, honestly, because we're getting into some far out territory that I haven't really studied enough, unfortunately, but this would be like my intuitive interpretation. Now, let us see here. I would be like remiss or whatever. Is that the word? I have no idea. But if I did not talk about how that Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction being sextile, her Saturn and Pluto, basically means that her sense of self is also going to be, her ego, her sense of self is also going to be tied, connected in a supportive way this time to Saturn things, the reality, the limit, death, darkness, all of that. Well, Pluto, I guess, is more darkness, but Saturn, make it real, make the creativity of Sagittarius real, that sort of thing. And also her ego and sense of self are going to be very much connected through the sextile to Pluto things, which is now darkness, the deep, dark unconscious, all or nothing energy, passion, extreme passion, going to extremes, transformation, catharsis, cleansing, purification. All of these things are connected, theoretically, at least in a supportive way, to her sense of self with that Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction in Sagittarius. I mean, like, I don't know how to put it any more plainly to you guys other than to say this is extremely powerful energy. I mean, when you consider this in terms of creativity, the creative potential in this combination of astrological factors is absolutely explosive as hell. I mean, it's off the charts. You know, it's dynamic in the greatest of ways. So let's see what else we can perhaps go over here. Interestingly enough, though, that Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction, as well as her Uranus, all the four things she has in Sagittarius, she also has in her sixth house of health, work, day-to-day activities, one's schedule, things of this nature, as if to say that her creativity and all of that stuff we kind of just went over is manifesting in a very habitual way for her. It's something that she just automatically does all the time, every day. But I would take that a step further because, see, the sixth house is not an easy house. That's what's interesting. Sixth house is difficult. It's difficult as hell. It's a house of illness. You know, the reason it's the house of health is because it's the house of illness, basically. But so it's almost like saying that there could also be a sense of toil for her when it comes to exercising her creative abilities. You know, maybe not always, but I'd say quite possibly a lot of the time, a sense of toil, a sense of maybe monotony at times, a sense of arduous work, basically. And that, of course, I guess being a challenge for her to hopefully overcome. But that's an interesting contrast to all that, you know, optimistic, idealistic Sagittarian energy. But it's a sixth house, so it's also kind of like toil and hard work a lot of times. So, you know, interesting stuff there. Then, of course, that Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction is quincunx to her in North Node, basically, as if to say a frustrating connection between her creativity, her sense of self as a creative being, and her self-expression, and her life purpose, if that makes sense. All right, so I think we've covered this fairly thoroughly. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a little break, and then we're going to come back, and then we're going to look at secondary progressions, and we're going to make some predictions for Amy Lee for, I guess, mainly this year of her life, like the next year or so, using some predictive astrology that I'm still kind of new to, but I can still do something. So that's my disclaimer, is I'm new to such that part of things. But we'll do that in a moment. And I hate to take another break, but I drank all that water, coffee before that. So yeah, I gotta kind of use the bathroom. Sorry. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back again. I apologize for the break, the interruption, but I am back now. Go grab a popsicle. Ryan, that sounds so delicious right now. sounds good to me. Do enjoy it. All right, so predictive astrology. Again, my disclaimer to this is I am new to these techniques. First, we're going to talk about what profection year she's going into, which is a technique I discovered, I don't know, a couple months ago or something, which is really easy. So I feel like I understand it well enough. I mean, if there's a lot more to it, I don't know what that more is, but we'll go over that. But then we're going to talk about secondary progressions, which I literally just discovered yesterday. So I am literally so new to that technique. So that's my disclaimer here, like don't expect me to be some expert on that, but I've gotten super into it. And there's a bunch of things I've figured out already about Amy Lee's chart that should be theoretically accurate. And so I'm not going to I'm not going to say what I'm not reasonably certain of, basically. But that is my one disclaimer, is I literally just discovered secondary progressions. But first, profections. So Amy Lee is, she just turned 38 today. And that means she's going into a third house profection year. That means that the third house of her chart and third house topics are going to be activated for her this year. The third house is communication, mental activity, short distance travel, and of course, perhaps, especially in her case, singing, being ruled by Mercury or whatever. So let's look back at her chart, at her third house in particular. Her third house is Virgo. Her third whole sign house is Virgo. So activating that practical, analytical energy for her this year. Hang on, I need to pull her chart back up on my tablet. Hang on. And of course, she has that Mars at the very end of Virgo. And so theoretically, somehow that Mars itself also manifests for her this year, whether that is in terms of like having a lot of energy and motivation for things, or running into someone or some situation that's very Mars-like. So like a person perhaps who's very aggressive or assertive or whatever, or maybe a situation that is very intense, that requires a lot of quick thinking and acting, like quick acting, especially in Mars's action. What else is I going to say? Of course, her Mars does form various positive aspects to points in her chart, including her moon, her Venus, her south node, and her Uranus. And so all of those energies could be activated, perhaps giving her, in a nutshell, much more passion for things. Let me get it back on my screen. Much more passion for things. Well, also, we have to remember that Mars rules her 10th house of career. And so a lot more passion for her career, perhaps even prioritizing her career much more this year of her life, the duration of her being 38. Of course, that Mars trines her Venus. And so there's that, great harmony between the cosmic lovers. So a lot of energizing of her creativity and art, prioritizing that perhaps this year, like this year especially, trining her south node, which I'm honestly not sure how I would interpret that. I have some theories, but I'm not sure enough about it, so I'm just going to say anything. And then sextiling her Uranus. So Mars sextile Uranus is like, oh boy, that's like the desire to fight for freedom from restraint, and fighting for freedom and individuality, and taking action based on unique ideas and breakthroughs, and like pushing forward into the new, and all of this stuff. So we could see an activation of that for her this year. So what was it? What else was I going to say about that? Okay, well, one thing that I do wonder though, and I don't know if this is the case with profections, but in my own life it seems to have been that since she has Mars at the very end of Virgo in her third house, it may be that this Mars thing really manifests or really shows itself close to the end of her being 38, like when she's like almost getting ready to turn 39, So like maybe like 11 to 12 months from now. But I don't know. That's just a theory of mine, but it seems to be true in my own life. Like it sort of follows in sequence with the year that it represents, if that makes sense. Like the house and sign follow that like a timeline. So let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, well, let's not, of course, forget, though, that Mars of hers does indeed, again, square her Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction. And so there might be some like internal conflict with herself creatively. And actually, well, that's theoretically getting activated this year for her, but that's something very key that I forgot to mention earlier. Let me just say this real quick. Amy Lee in general, what appears to be built into her personality is this strong internal conflict between her sense of self as this creative, Sagittarian, idealistic being, and also her Mars, what she prioritizes, and maybe even her career. So, like, because Mars is the ruler of her 10th house of career. And so I think it's quite likely that she faces a lot of basically internal creative conflict between her sense of self as a creative being and her career and career direction and how she prioritizes things in her career, perhaps. So, take that for what you will. And it's interesting because, Evanescence has made some interesting, like sort of adjustments, like creative adjustments over the years that you almost wouldn't expect. They kind of like keep like reinventing themselves, and with I'm sure Amy Lee leading this. So let's see, where should we go next? Well, we need to talk about the ruler of her third house, of course, since this is, again, a third house profection year for her. Her third house is getting activated this year. And again, third house, communication, mental activity, short distance travel, and I would say can also be Mercury things like singing. So with her being a vocalist, I'm throwing that in there. Now, again, Mercury in her chart, of course, as we were just talking about, is in Sagittarius conjunct her Sun and Neptune. So in terms of like, how will things manifest for her this year overall? Well, that is where we have that very square with her Mars. So there is that sense of perhaps internal creative conflict being activated on the negative side of things, but on the positive side of things, we do have those sextiles to stabilizing Saturn and powerful, potent Pluto. So let's see. I would say the most important things to consider will be that Mars being there, like Mars things being involved in this year for her, and also the Mercury ruler in Sagittarius talking about the activation of her creativity and that sort of thing, and heading for the horizon. So, all right. So that's about it for perfections. Let us move on now to secondary progressions and see what we can find out. Now, this is where things I personally think get really interesting compared to just perfections. Perfections are fairly interesting, but this is where we really start figuring out like some fascinating things. So let me just sort of show this in its entirety first. First of all, if you don't understand secondary progressions, the Astrology Podcast did a great episode on that, available right here on YouTube, that I highly recommend looking up. Just search Astrology Podcast Secondary Progressions and you'll find it. They'll explain it very well, probably much better than I can. However, I generated a chart for her for today, basically, for like where things are at for her with secondary progressions and what that tells us about her life and how things are progressing and what is coming for her, what phase and cycle of her life is she in. And I'm just going to show that chart overall right here, right now. So people can get hopefully a good look at it. Okay, so let us burn and observe. Actually, let me also pull this up on my computer so I have it in front of me. Let's see here. Where the hell is it? There it is. So it's interesting as we're dealing with secondary progressions, about what energy is sort of coloring a person's journey through life. Well, there's a number of things we can look at. First of all, since I mentioned this earlier, this is what I will bring up immediately here. Her secondary progressed ascendant is now in Leo, and it has been for a very long time. I think since she was like probably 10 or 11 years old. So even though she was born as a Cancer ascendant, like ascendant in Cancer, and she remains that fundamentally, that is now like colored or influenced by this ascendant in Leo, which is a much more expressive, bold, showy, dramatic energy, basically. Also very passionate, but of course, so is Cancer. I would say Cancer and Leo, both passionate, but in very different ways. Also, where Cancer is lunar, Leo is solar, being ruled by the moon and the sun, respectively. So I think that's very interesting, and I think it makes a lot of sense for where her like career and all of that went. But here we're just getting started. So looking at her moon now, her secondary progressed moon is in Sagittarius and in her 5th house. Now, it would be in her 6th natal house, but it's in her 5th secondary progressed house, okay? So the moon is one of the biggest things that we want to look at when determining, what is coming for this person. What is this next phase of their life? What is happening now and going to be happening in the near future for them? So now let me just show that on screen here. Moon in the 5th. You can see it right there in her secondary progressed chart. Co-present with Uranus and Neptune. Again, secondary progressed. Well, moon in Sagittarius, of course, is more of that energy of inspiration, enthusiasm, creativity, idealism, powerful belief, a desire for truth and justice, all of this stuff. And so she's entering a very like wide-ranging phase of her life right now, and that doesn't matter if we consider it being the fifth house or the sixth house. Moon in Sagittarius, this is an expansive, wide-ranging, hopeful, optimistic phase of her life that she is basically right in the middle of right now, and she will continue to be in it for roughly, should be at least another year. Let me just, I can actually find out real quick. One moment. I will literally find out real quick. Go forward by a year. Yeah, at least another year. And then let's go forward by a couple of months. Okay, sometime by March of 2021, her secondary progressed moon will change signs into Capricorn. But so, yeah, that means for literally more than a year, she still has this very expansive, hopeful phase of her life to experience. So that's very good. And then if we interpret it as being in the fifth house, as shown here with the ascendant in Leo, well, the fifth house is fun. It's love and romance. It's risk-taking and that sort of thing. And so a much more fun area of her life opening up. If we were to read it as where it is in her natal chart, the sixth house, that's a little less exciting because, again, the sixth house is like illness and where we toil away and hard work and monotony and this sort of thing. Of course, it's also your schedule, your day-to-day activities, and that sort of thing. But I guess we can say hopefully it applies far more to her secondary progressed house being the fifth than it does the sixth. So, and again, that's the thing that if I was a student of secondary progressions for much longer, I would probably know which one is more relevant, or maybe one is far more relevant than the other. Okay, so that's her moon. Now, let's get into something really interesting here. Her sun. Where is her secondary progressed sun, and where has it been? Well, I'm gonna talk about the past a little bit first, how it changed throughout her life, and then talk about where it is now and will be in the near future. So first of all, and I'm gonna just multitask while I explain this. How do I open this up? We are all born with our sun in whatever sign, right? Like someone says, I'm a Capricorn or I'm a Sagittarius. That means they have the sun in Capricorn or Sagittarius or whatever sign it is. Well, secondary progressions, without getting into a lot of detail, basically has your sun slowly changing signs basically once every 30 years, but it depends when you were born, when it first happened. So for Amy Lee, since her natal sun is at, I believe it was 22 or thereabouts of Sagittarius, 23, I'd have to pull up the chart again. But since it was towards the end of Sagittarius, she was quite young when her secondary progressed sun changed signs from Sagittarius into Capricorn. Now, what does this mean? This means that while she remains a Sagittarius at heart, her sense of self at a very young age did become more Capricorn-like because of this secondary progressed sun. So what is Capricorn like? Capricorn is focusing on the reality of things. It's more practical. It's more pessimistic. It's certainly a hell of a lot darker. You know, it's ruled by austere Saturn. And again, I have to say, when you listen to like the music of Evanescence, led by Amy Lee as the vocalist, or well, she's the lead vocalist of the band. It sounds to me a lot like Sagittarian energy, largely colored by Capricorn energy. So her sense of self at a young age became more dark, more serious, more reserved, more practical, maybe even a little more pessimistic, even prone to depression. I mean, I can tell you from firsthand experience, being a Sun conjunct Saturn Capricorn myself, that it tends to make you pretty fucking prone to pessimism and depression. I mean, my God. Thank the gods I've got Mars and Sagittarius and Jupiter and Cancer present with my midheaven. But anyway, so I think basically that was a very long, far-reaching period of her life, and approximately 30 years, because there's 30 degrees in a sign, and the sun moves approximately 1 degree per day. I'm going to look this up real quick. I want to see specifically what it was that her sun changed signs, and it won't take me too long. So just give me a moment here. Just a bunch of clicks of my mouse, and we'll figure it out. Okay, so almost there. Okay, so by October 17th of 1989, give or take a week or whatever, by like mid-October 1989, when she would have been, let's see, 1981, she would have turned 8 that year. So when she was 7 years, almost 8 years old, her secondary progressed sun changed from Sagittarius to Capricorn, and she took on this much more serious veneer or sense of self. So there you have it. However, now we go back to where she is in the present day, and this is also very interesting because it just so happens that her secondary progressed sun at long last changed again. It moved into the next sign of Aquarius, which we'll get to in the description of in a moment. But hang on, I guess I'm going to animate this again so I can see approximately when this happened. Let's see, that happened just under a year, or no, kind of less than that amount of time ago. It happened looks like in early April. Wait, no, late March. It happened in late March of this year, like very close to the end of March 2019. Her secondary progressed sun went from Capricorn into Aquarius. So now, all of a sudden, and for the next 30 years, her sense of self, while still remaining Sagittarian at heart, is also very much influenced by this Aquarian energy. And Aquarius is an air sign. It's also ruled by Saturn, like Capricorn, interestingly enough. So there will be a continuation, in all likelihood, of the seriousness and reality-oriented ways of Saturn. But there's also now going to be this, there should theoretically be perhaps a more detached intellectual side to Amy Lee. There, in fact, I would say, since Aquarius is kind of the oddball, ruled by unpredictable Uranus in the modern rulership, also ruled by Saturn then traditionally, Aquarius is unpredictable. So Amy Lee, for the next 30 years of her life, is likely to get more in touch with her unpredictable side, things that she has not maybe identified with before, she may find herself identifying with, and that may or may not come out in the public sphere, like in her music, art, various career projects or whatever. But I wouldn't be surprised if it did, because this is some very key stuff here. So that's what we have. Her secondary progressed sun just changed signs to Aquarius earlier this year, and it's going to be there for the next 30 years. So she's entering a whole new phase of her life at this point. And that is, of course, in contrast to her secondary progressed moon in 5th house in Sagittarius, which will be there for a little over a year from now. as we have been over. All right, so let's see what else. Let me just pull up her birth chart again on my screen, and I'll just compare it to our secondary progress chart on my tablet, and that'll make things much easier. Okay, let's see. So her secondary progressed Mercury is now at 18 of Aquarius. Her natal Mercury is in Sagittarius. Okay. So her Mercury has changed signs twice as well, similar to her sun. And I guess I'm not going to look up the exact times of this. I mean, we could, if you guys really want me to, I can look it up, but probably not really necessary. Just to say that her Mercury went from being in Sagittarius, again, Mercury the mind, Sagittarius, optimism, idealism, enthusiasm, inspiration, all this stuff, into Capricorn. Also, it would have been at relatively a young age. And so her mind became more serious and reality oriented and perhaps a bit pessimistic, even perhaps prone to some depression on some level. But, and this would have been a while back, and I will look up this part because I think it's very important. Her secondary progressed Mercury moved into Aquarius. So all of a sudden, we're out of the seriousness and sort of, I almost want to say heaviness of Capricorn, or at least that's how I would see it manifesting. And we're into the unpredictability and intellectual detachment of Aquarius, trying new things, futuristic. Let's do things differently. It's Mercury, so let's think differently. Let's communicate differently. Let's perhaps even sing differently. So I think that's very interesting indeed. And like I said, I will, of course, look that up real quick. When did that change actually take place? Let us just find out here. Hang on. This thing is confusing me. One moment. Well, it's not really confusing me. I'm just accidentally clicking the wrong things. Amy Lee, secondary progressed. Animate. Okay, here we go. It was quite a few years ago. She had an interesting like Mercury, like secondary progressed Mercury Venus conjunction sometime in looks like it was like early 2009 or something, like maybe late 2008, early 2009. But one moment. Let me see something here. Okay, so her natal Venus is at 3 of Aquarius, which means she had a Mercury natal Venus conjunction, which is likely to be very significant, I would say, or I would at the very least theorize. And that was, let's see, 319, a little bit before that. Oh my God. Okay. She had a secondary progressed Mercury natal Venus conjunction sometime in September of 2006. Now, the reason that this strikes me as so important and almost even shocking is because, first of all, it's Mercury Venus. Mercury, the voice, communication, singing, Venus, art and music. Conjunction, something's happening. Now, remember, it was sometime in September 2006. Now, just watch. When did Evanescence's album The Open Door come out?
The initial release date of The Open Door is September 25th, 2006.
There you go. Res ipsa locator, as they say. September 25th, 2006, same month that she had a powerful secondary progressed Mercury natal Venus conjunction. This is predictive astrology and what it can do. That's why I'm addicted to this stuff. This especially the secondary progression technique, since I discovered it. Like, I can't get enough of it. It drives me crazy. It's amazing. In fact, we could probably figure out a whole bunch of other things with this tonight if we decided to, but unfortunately, we probably won't have the time. Okay, so we wanted to also figure out, though, however, speaking of her Mercury, is when did her Mercury change signs from Capricorn to Aquarius? When did perhaps the way that she communicated, expressed herself, and all that change? Well, let us see. And then, yes, we're also going to look into the future soon. So stay tuned for that. All right. Amy Lee, secondary progression, animates. Okay. All right. Here we go. Would have been sometime after July 12, 2004. Let's just inch it forward a tiny bit. Hang on. Oh, there it is. July 13th, 2004. We could basically just say like mid-July 2004 or something like that. So that's interesting. So if Mercury is representative of the voice, and it is, and she finished up that rather long, portion of her life, segment of her life with Mercury and Capricorn, just having her voice and singing being, and her ways of communicating being much more like serious and Capricorn like. It's interesting that, as I looked up earlier, I looked this up before the stream, the release date of her album, well, Evanescence's album, Fallen, is March 5th of 2003. So like, just as Mercury is like nearing the end of that cycle, she releases that album as if to be like the culmination, the grand finale of her secondary progressed Mercury in serious calculating Capricorn. And again, Mercury is like the voice and all that. And then Mercury made this interesting shift into Aquarius, and suddenly, well, her secondary progressed Mercury. And so suddenly, when it comes to the way she communicates, sings, and all of that, she is likely then interested in new things, doing things differently. And what did we see when Evanescence released their next album, The Open Door? But we saw what I would argue, and I think many would argue, was very different music than from what they had done previously in Fallen or in their demo album Origin. I was an Evanescence stan back in the day. What can I say? Before the word stan, many years before the word stan ever came into popular usage. So I conveniently know these things. All right, so where should we take this next at this point? One moment. So I'm just curious real quick now. And yeah, her sun is at 22 of Sagittarius. Her sun would have also passed over, her secondary progressed sun would have also passed over her natal south node at 24 of Capricorn. That might have also been a telling time. let's look that up real quick and see what that was. And then I promise we're going to look into the future, because with her natal Venus at 3 of Aquarius, you can bet there's going to be some stuff happening, and I can tell you when it is likely to happen. So just give me a moment here. All right. Sun over the south node. Secondary progressed sun, that is. Come on, astrology program. There we go. Secondary progressed sun over the south node, meaning at 24 of Capricorn. Where are you located at? Let's see, 24 degrees and 7 minutes. We'll just get it fairly close here, because why not? Okay, it would have been in June of 2013. Huh. This time I can't think of anything. I don't know if anything particularly significant happened with Evanescence in June of 2013. However, now wait just a second here. If we go back a bit further, though. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I found something very interesting anyway. Let me get the exact time for, or at least something very close to the exact time. Let's see. Okay. You got to be kidding me. Okay, so it was in like late November of 2011 where her secondary progressed sun aligned with her secondary progressed south node. And I wish I could show this, but I guess you're gonna have to take my word for it. I don't know. If anyone really wants me to, I'll take a picture of it, like through my phone or something, and show it like that. But otherwise, I guess you can just take my word for it. But here's the thing. November 26, 2011, or well, late November 2011 is when this conjunction happened. Well, I don't know if Google can answer this or not, but let's just see. When did Evanescence release their self-titled Evanescence album?
October 11th, 2011. According to IMDb, released their new self-titled album Evanescence on October 11th, 2011. The self-titled album Evanescence debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 for the week of October 15th, 2011.
So there you have it. Her secondary progressed sun aligned with her secondary progressed south node in November of 2011. And literally just 1 month before that, which is not long in secondary progression terms or whatever, this album was released. So isn't that interesting? Okay, but now, hopefully I'm not boring anyone with these minor details. I don't know, they're super interesting to me. Well, they're not minor details. They're not minor details to me. I hope they're not minor details in the minds of other people. That's what I meant by saying that. We're going to look at the future now for Amy Lee. We're going to look at this coming year where she will indeed, or well, I don't know if it'll be this year. Actually, it might still be a bit, but she's going to have a secondary progressed sun natal Venus conjunction with her natal Venus at 319 of Aquarius. So let's see exactly when that will be, first of all. Secondary progressed. Oh shit, my grill light just turned on. Wow, I've been doing this for way too long. Okay, secondary progressed sun reaching 3. Well, actually, hang on 1 second. Just as a quick aside, she's actually on the verge of a secondary progressed sun, secondary progressed Venus conjunction, which perfects, let's see. Come on, can we get it more exact than that? Basically like late March of 2020. she has a secondary progressed Sun, secondary progressed Venus conjunction in Aquarius. So let's talk about this first. Wow, I can literally see the glow of my grow light. This is so insane. The Sun is the ego or sense of self. Venus is music and art. A conjunction means that these two are coming together, and through secondary progression, things should happen. So let's see if Google can answer this question well. Hopefully they can. Remember, this perfects around the end of March 2020. When does Evanescence go on tour with Within Temptation?
According to blabbermouth.net, Evanescence and Within Temptation to join forces for Worlds Collide 2020 European Tour.
All right, and then after that, it says, in what promises to be one of the biggest tours of next year, Evanescence and Within Temptation will join forces for Worlds Collide, a massive co-headline European run kicking off in Brussels, Belgium on April 4th, 2020. Read it right there in black and white. Read it and weep. All right, or read it and don't weep, I guess. We're celebrating the power of predictive astrology here, I guess. Now, what else was I going to say about that? Oh, yeah. Let me see something. I don't know. I'm just kind of mentally musing, thinking of how Sharon Denadell of Within Temptation is a Sun in Cancer ruled by the moon, and wondering if that connects with Amy Lee with this Sun-Venus, the secondary Sun-Venus conjunction taking place in her 7th house of partnerships. But anyway, I don't know. Let's move on to the next point. When does her secondary progressed Sun align with her Venus? Because when this happens, basically, I would say you can expect something else very significant to happen with Amy Lee. Again, involving like a big like musical project or something like that. Like something again like this Worlds Collides tour or Worlds Collide tour. I mean, something like that, maybe not exactly like that, could be something else, but something very big involving her music and creativity. Let's just take a look here. All right, when does her Sun reach 319 of Aquarius? Let's see, sorry about that. I'm kind of just cracking my neck live on stream because I've been streaming for so long. Can't help myself. This is intoxicating in the best possible way. It is addictive, and it is interesting, and it is fun. Okay. So it's actually not until late June of 2022. So it is a bit in the future, yes, but I would say, hear me out now. I'm saying this now. I'm making this prediction now for Amy Lee. Late June or maybe into July of 2022, expect some kind of other like big project from her, maybe like the Worlds Collide tour or some other kind of special tour, or maybe like a new album or something very much involving like her sense of self, the Sun, and also Venus, her art and her music. So that's a prediction I'm making for like a couple years from now for her, using this predictive timing technique. Have found to be very accurate thus far. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else we should look at before we sort of wrap this up here? And we are going to have to wrap it up soon, sadly. Let us just see. We've been going for more than 3 hours at this point. My God. Let me just see. Give me a moment. Her secondary progressed Venus is currently retrograde, which, again, I'm not an expert on this yet, but that's indicating some kind of significant changes around her, not only her music and art, but also quite possibly potentially her love life, her social life, her financial life, all those Venus things. It is retrograde now, and it's been retrograde. Let's see here. How long has it been retrograde? Where the hell is it? Jeez. Okay. It's been retrograde, actually. Okay, maybe that's not quite as significant as I thought. Like I said, I'm new to this particular kind of predictive astrology technique. It's actually been retrograde since like 1998 or something, so maybe it's not such a big deal. But hang on just a second. I can tell you what will be a big deal is if it retrogrades back into Capricorn and or turns direct anytime soon. So let's look at that real quick. What happens here? Okay, wait, it's on the cusp of Capricorn now. All right, there it is. We're looking at roughly mid-December of 2021. Mid-December of 2021, Amy Lee's secondary progressed Venus, representing her music and her art, will finally, after all, the first time in her life, retrograde back into Capricorn. I can almost guarantee you that by about that time, December 2021, her music and art is likely to go through a very powerful shift. Or if not her music and art, then some Venus thing in her life, her financial life, her love life, her social life, any or all of the above. Like, I can almost promise you that because of how accurate I've seen this technique to be so far. Again, that's December of 2021. All right, so, and then, well, let's take that a step further. When does it finally go direct? How far into the future is that? Let's just sort of race through here. And okay, wait, there it was. Hang on. Okay, wait, I'm gonna zero in on it a bit more. Okay, well, oh boy, this is a long way into the future, but by September of 2040, her secondary progressed Venus will finally go direct in Capricorn, and it will happen, interestingly enough, at 23 of Capricorn, which is only 1 degree, maybe less than a degree, depending on like where it happens. Well, I guess it would have to be less than a degree. Yeah. Less than 1 degree from her south node. So again, for those who are interested in stuff happening like over 20 years from now, September of 2040, mark my words, Amy Lee will go through another significant shift in her music and art life, or her love and social life, or financial life, those Venus things. But this time it's over her south node, her natal south node, as if to say that there's going to be some powerful like karmic connection to it or something. I'm not sure. I don't have enough study in this particular area to say for sure what, or to say with reasonable accuracy what that will be. But just the fact that what I do know is that it being over her south node is very significant. That's very powerful. Very, very powerful. Probably has something to do with well, no, I guess it would have to, especially with her North Node ascendant conjunction in Cancer, with her fate or destiny, as we kind of talked about earlier. All right, so moving on. What can we look for next? Bringing this back to the present time, December 13th. Of course, her Mars. would have entered Libra at a very young age. Let's see, did it ever go through a retrograde period? Let me just see here. Secondary progressed retrograde period. Doesn't look like it. Okay, will it in the future? One moment, I shall find out. Because if her secondary progressed Mars goes retrograde at some point, that's going to be a huge shift. That's going to be a huge shift. So let's just see here. All right. Wait. Okay, there it is. I had to go pretty damn far, but there it is. All right. By December of 2050, I know we're going far, but just for the hell of it, by December 2050, her secondary progressed Mars will go retrograde. There'll be significant shifts in the area of her life that is all about Mars things, action, assertion, aggression, willpower, what we prioritize, what motivates us. And since it rules her career, well, I don't know if you can combine this or not, but maybe there will be a significant change in her career at that time. Anyway, let's go back to other things though. Let's back to the present time. Okay, this is kind of interesting. Her ascendant will change signs within the next, I think, decade. Let's see, when is that exactly? Can I get a bit more specific? There we go. All right, by sometime during February of 2029, her ascendant, her secondary progressed ascendant will change from Leo to Virgo. So you'll see another significant change there. But anyway, I think we've probably gone over enough by now. And a lot of these things really are a lot further into the future than I thought they were going to be. One moment. You see if there's anything else to talk about before we wrap this up. Oh, yes, of course there is. When does her moon, something that does indeed deal with the immediate here and now, change signs? Her secondary progressed moon again. When does that secondary progressed moon change signs? So I guess we looked at this earlier, actually, but let's zero in on it a bit more now. Okay. Late February of 2021. So a little over a year from now. Yeah, I remember us talking about this now. Okay, I'm tired. Her moon will change signs. Her secondary progressed moon will change signs and enter her sixth house. At least sixth house, according to her secondary progressed ascendant now being in Leo. Sixth house is, again, while fifth house is great where it has been, sixth house is difficult. Sixth house toil and work and it can be a house of illness, that sort of thing. So there may be a challenging couple of years there. If we were to use the natal house system, it would be in her seventh house, and then relationships will be emphasized. But anyway, I think we have more than sufficiently covered this stuff tonight. And I could keep going if I really wanted to, but it's literally been over 3 hours. So yeah, it's getting really late. I need to get ready for bed. So I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I don't know if I'm always going to be this extensive when analyzing birth charts in the future of various individuals, but I might be. I don't know. I guess it depends on the person and their chart and what all there is to talk about. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Happy birthday, Amy Lee. Happy 38th birthday. And remember, there are changes, great changes coming, but this is if I was speaking to Amy Lee directly right now, telling her future based on this stuff, I'd be like, this is a a great time in your life overall, where you can look forward to a lot of fun with that secondary progressed moon in the 5th house and in Sagittarius. A continuation of a lot of fun and great like expansiveness, really expanding your horizons and that sort of thing. A lot of hope and optimism as well at this time. So thank you so much. Happy birthday, Amy Lee of Evanescence. And if there are any other interesting people whose birth charts any of you watching would like me to look at, you can feel free to make a suggestion, and I will strongly consider it. So, all right. Have a great night, my dear viewers. Bye for now.